This 5-year-old girl, Suli, helped lug buckets of berries picked by her parents and her brothers, Picho, who was 8 years old, and Cristobal, who told us he was 7.
Americans think of child labor as a problem elsewhere, but in fact we have that problem in our own backyard.
It's a long day for 3-year-old Letty, up at dawn and working until dusk, picking the chili peppers Mexico is so famous for.
We found this child and others working in one of the biggest blueberry operations in Michigan, a supplier to Walmart.
Charges of slavery and deplorable working conditions largely stem from the humid tomato fields of South Florida, where thousands of laborers harvest millions of tomatoes each year. Benitez says migrant farm workers are denied the right to organize, don't receive benefits like health insurance, sick leave, and pensions, and often live in substandard housing.
The living conditions here are really subhuman. Housing is a real problem here, but in the end, everything is still tied back to the low wages that we earn in the field.
Companies like Taco Bell and McDonald's pay tomato suppliers on a per-pound basis.
Hey guys, it's me here, Comrade Lavender here, and today I'm back with another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive video of the pure evil files, the blueberry, chili peppers, and tomato files. In this video, I'm just going to be talking about, child labor and, capitalism atrocities and things like that. So yeah, so let's get started and jump right into the video. So yeah, the chili pepper harvest is especially dependent on underage workers. Long a staple for Mexico's indigenous population, chili peppers have grown increasingly in popularity in the United States and other countries, flavoring ballpark nachos and happy hour appetizers and serving as the main ingredient in hot sauces and salsa all around the world. An estimated 100,000 Mexican children under the age of 14 pick crops for pay. Produced from farms that employ children, reaches the United States through long chains of middlemen. A pepper picked by a child can exchange 5 or 6 times as in hands before reaching an American grocery store or a salsa factory. A victim of capitalism, Alejandra, 12, wanted to be a teacher. Instead, she became a nomadic laborer following the pepper harvest from farm to farm. A victim of capitalism, Alejandra Casino, a pepper picker since she was 12, and it was hard for her to lift a full 15-pound load into her basket/bag. Over one row over was her brother Fidel, 13, who couldn't keep up with her. Their 10-year-old cousin Jesus was trying harder but failing behind too. Alejandra looked in the distance for the food truck. It was almost noon, 5 hours since she had last had breakfast or a meal. Alejandra and her family traveled across central and northern Mexico, picking crops in a loop that covered more than 1,000 miles as a whole. Alejandra slept on the bare floors of tumble-down shacks and farm-out houses and outbuildings. She suffered headaches that lasted for days, blaming them on the Mexico heat. In the fields of Chihuahua, Mexico, she watched out for scorpions. In Jacino, she saw her pregnant aunt, Amelia, kneel over in a tamalo field. The aunt later gave birth to a stillborn baby. Snakes were a constant worry in the area as well, and a danger. The grower provided no food or water for them. The child workers nibbled on tortillas and sipped from plastic bottles. They disappeared behind rows of chili to relieve themselves. And on a hot day in September 2013, in a tomato field in Josiah, her brother Fidel came too close to where she was working, and there was a farm accident. Clearing the fields of plants, Fidel swung his machete wide and opened a gash at Alejandra's right ankle. Alejandra recalled she limped under the tree and pressed a soiled rag against the wound to stop the bleeding. In Guatemala, children were seen harvesting peppers at a farm where produce eventually reaches the U.S. distribution hub in Texas. Data on child labor are scarce. Many growers and distributors will not talk about it. About 100,000 Mexican children under the age of 14 pick crops for pay, according to estimates in a 2012 study by the World Bank and other international agencies. According to Mexican media reports and data gathered by a charitable group, at least 100 children of farm laborers have been killed or injured since 2010, crushed by tractors, stricken by disease, drowned in irrigation canals, or more frequently, thrown from buses or open-bed trucks. The Times watched her go The Times watched her and dozens of other children harvest chili peppers at a mid-sized farm in Tecapin, south of the resort city of Malden. In December 2013, the grower Sergin Consantos said in an interview that he supplies chili peppers to La Cassandra, one of Mexico's biggest salsa makers and a major exporter to the United States. The tomato industry alone is worth $2.8 billion. Driving down I-75 behind a large gravel truck a few years back, Barry Esbrook thought he saw a clutch of green apples bouncing off the back of the truck. Getting to stop for a closer look, he realized that they were in fact green tomatoes, not green apples. But dropping onto the pavement at high speed failed to smash, crack, or even scratch the fallen fruits. In fact, they were completely free of all blemishes, glistening like those that have become accustomed to finding on the grocery shelves year-round. This seemingly indestructible nature of tomatoes led him to an in-depth, deep-dive investigation into the huge Florida tomato industry. This led him into a very dark world that strives for maximum capitalism profits, regardless of the effects on worker health or caring a world about the employees or product quality. One of the most palatable aspects of Florida tomato farming is the use of toxic pesticides and other chemicals that workers are exposed to on a daily basis. As Strongbrook recounts, speaking with workers who became drenched with liquid pesticide and liquid carcinogens while working in the fields, the opportunity cost of creating hospital growing conditions in the poor Florida soil is substantial. As explained, an acre of Florida tomatoes gets hit with 5 times as much fungicide and 6 times as much pesticide as an acre of California tomatoes. In fact, chemical use is so prevalent in American agriculture sector that these workers have the highest probability of facing pesticide poisoning of any other worker. In any sector handling pesticide, he explains that 3 women were ordered to pick tomatoes in a restricted entry interval zone without being warned of the possible side effects or dangers involved in pesticide exposure. As a result of their exposure, all 3 women bore children with severe birth defects. Under a blazing sun bearing down on the Florida peninsula, Silva, a Guatemalan immigrant, labored in the staked-down tomato fields for female workers. These rows of fields could be dangerous places, with threats ranging from sexual harassment to groping to outright sexual assault. As farm laborers, they have few options if they get fired, says Silva, speaking through a translator. Other true crime cases have involved tomato pickers being locked in box trucks under armed guards, and first graders laboring in Michigan blueberry groves. An ABC News investigation has exposed how one of the country's largest blueberry growers used child labor on its fields. Atkins Blue Ribbon Packing in South Haven, Michigan is at the center of the scandal. An 11-year-old boy in the Atkins fields told the Cargillant fellows that he had been picking blueberries since the age of 8. They were ordered to work unless on their deathbed. Blueberry pickers claim supervisors at sprawling blueberry farm in northern Washington state threatened and imitated workers and ordered them to report for 12-hour shifts unless they were on the deathbed, according to a federal lawsuit. The lawsuit filed in Seattle is brought by 2 workers employed at a farm in Summit in 2017 and seeks a class action status to represent more than 600 of their fellow workers and employees. The suit describes a ruthless, hostile workplace for Silva and other foreign workers. During the summer of 2017, Sunderland brought in 618 temporary workers from Mexico to help with the harvest on the sprawling farm on the border of Washington state and Canada. It was a season scarred by protests and death. The lawsuit claimed the managers routinely threatened to send workers back to Mexico and blacklist them from future H-2A contracts if they did not pick 2 boxes of blueberries an hour or if they complained, aka retaliation. The account states that Serbian fired workers who got sick or injured but did not pay for their transportation home, and in some cases, other workers donated money to help co-workers return home. According to the lawsuit, Suburban provided meager meals, sometimes ran out of food, and used a colored ink marker to put an X on each foreign worker's hand to ensure they did not receive more than 1 portion. At one point, the lawsuit states a Suburban manager told workers, "You came here to suffer, not for vacation." In the Italian South, the the lives of foreign agricultural laborers are so cheap that many NGOs have described their conditions as modern-day form of slavery. They live in isolated rural ruins or shoddy towns. Some have Italian residency permits, but many don't. A few have worker contracts, although the union organizers find they are fake. Desperate for work, these laborers will accept any job in the fields, even if the wages are low and the hours far below union standards. They produce, they pick regularly, ends up on the shelves of Italian and international supermarkets, bought by customers who have no idea what the suffering involved. There are dozens of slums like San Fernando across southern Italy, swelling and contracting according to the season. Often the laborers are driven from one remote shoddy town to another by gang masters. A majority draw for tomato pickers is Borgo Mazzini near Faraga. One of the men who died in the campus crash last summer had a brother, Sid, who was living in London but came to Italy when he heard about the news of his brother's death. Sid shows us around the camp. He said he couldn't believe his brother had been living in such misery. Migrants usually arrive in Italy with nothing but debts. After borrowing money from relatives back home to finance their journey to Europe, they usually don't know nobody, and when they reach their destination, they have no one to appeal to when in difficulty. And in April 2014, an auction for tomatoes was in progress. In Naples, a manufacturer of tomato products was called. Fernando stared at his computer screen in concentration as the price dropped. He was managing director of La Famente, a company based on the slopes of Versailles, which sold tinned canned tomatoes and purees. What he saw shocked him. The tomato growing season hadn't even begun, but a supermarket chain was inviting a supply price of 20 tins of tomatoes. Frenzy was logged on to the online portal, and every time a rival company lowered their price, a 2-minute timer started. It was like a game, he told us. You had to just keep going lower and lower to stay in it. It was the only auction that I've seen going downwards. You didn't even know if the other bids were real or not. It was just a way to force down the price. He knew that figures didn't add up. The price rival companies were offering to sell for had to be calculated below their cost. To produce a tin of tomatoes, he told us, certain expenses are out of your control, such as the price of the tin, energy and water costs, and so on. The only place where you can squeeze savings in are labor costs, the only place. He decided not to participate in the auction, and accepting these industrial prices, he said, we're actually selling the skin of the farm workers. Prices paid to tomato processing companies, which turn the raw fruit into tins of tomatoes, concentrates, sauces, and ketchups, are constantly forced down. Those processors, in turn, readjust the prices they may pay to farmers in order to maintain the profit margin. Given that supermarkets are surrounding their tomatoes from crime-ridden areas of southern Italy, one might expect them to be circumspect of their suppliers, but they lack the willingness, or they don't really care at all, to probe deeply into where their products are sourced. Mexican workers say they are victims of abuse on Canadian farms where they worked. Pesticides are applied in greenhouses 2 or 3 times a week. They claim they are forced to handle vegetables covered with chemicals without being entitled to protective equipment like the people who are spraying the pesticide. Juan and Rodrigo, victims of capitalism, attribute headaches they've had and also burns to throat and skin irritation to pesticides they breathe in during their long working days. According to Rodrigo, even if they complain to the supervisors, they demand they continue to work. In early July, Rodrigo had to be hospitalized for 2 days because of a kidney stone. The man had to sign a loan without understanding the forms related to his hospitalization and the surgery he underwent. Upon his release, although an intervention like the one received requires a few days off, Rodrigo said his supervisor demanded him return to work immediately. He said that when he refused and explained he had to rest for a week, the managers of the farm where he worked bought him a ticket for Mexico 4 months before the end of his contract.